Alrighty, everyone, we're back. Uh, it's great to be back for another episode of Measured Response. Sorry for missing last week. Safer and I were actually in the same place, and we're having a good time, and then suddenly realized it was time to start Measured Response, and that none of the gear was set up. So hopefully none of you all missed us too much, and you gave us a plethora of questions to get to. So we're gonna see as far as we go. We might do a second back-to-back proper measure response rather than doing a replay review next week, depending on how many we get through. Yeah, as always, this is Measure Response. My name is Jeff, also known as Ysengrin. We're here to answer your questions. Once again, if you want to submit your own questions, we love to have people come on live, though it's been a little bit, and we also love voice recordings. We're going to have a recording today that we're going to go through. But you can also just submit questions on a little forum thread in the Discord server. So thanks everyone for tuning in, submitting questions. We got a nice set. But also, I should introduce the other host and we can all say hi to Safer. Say hi, Safer.
Hi, Safer. Hi, Jeff.
How are you
I'm so
doing?
tired. So tired.
So tired.
I'm traveling so much, and I'm home now for until Worlds. Thank God.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, me too.
Yeah, but yeah, I think both of us are recovery.
Yeah.
So much fun, but also
Yeah,
recovery.
Man, I'm feeling what am I saying? I feel like even just like 5 years ago, I was able to do like 5 hours in a car and like not sleeping and like just bounce back, and like this year it really caught up to me, even though I tried to sleep as much as I can.
Yeah.
So
12 hours door to door was the trip back. Somehow it was more tiring than the trip there, which was like
yeah,
14. Yeah.
that's interesting. Well, I mean, also you were probably better rested before those 12 hours than
Yeah.
after.
Yeah, it definitely was. Ugh. Excuse me. I apologize to everyone for my yawning today. All right. We have so many questions to go through. Should we jam it?
Yeah, let's get jamming. Do you want to read the first one?
All right. So Rohit has a simple question. Why do expendables all have the same cost? This is a simple answer. And the answer is just for card clarity and so that players can remember things. Imagine that Toxin had an expend cost of 2 and Flash and Bird had a expend cost of 1, and what's the other 3-1 agenda? Eminent Domain had no expend cost. You would probably have a hard time remembering what each thing actually costed. So we just try to keep it nice and simple. If there's ever a reason to diverge, we could, but we might as well stick with the pattern while it makes sense too.
Yeah, I think also Liberation that introduced threat, like said, oh, no, we're only going to have 2 numbers for threat. It's going to be 3 or 4. I actually think in retrospect it
Yeah.
would better if we just said like every core card's a 3, every runner card's a 4, like made it something like that, so it'd be even easier to
Yeah.
remember. Because I think, I think is easy to overestimate how many numbers people can remember and hold in their head at the same time. And so actually having rules like expend is always the card and the credit just keeps things really nice and easy. So it's something I definitely, as a playtester, underappreciated, but as someone who now does less playtesting and is less ingrained in the cards, it's nicer to have these kind of shortcuts and consistencies.
Yeah. I was having a conversation with Friday earlier today about one Boto's threat text and all of the numbers on it being very aesthetically pleasing. It's really easy to remember kind of what Boto's numbers are and what its text is because of its relation to itself and other cards in the card pool. I guess I should probably explain that. It's threat 4, it's base strength 4. It gets +2 strength on threat 4. 4 + 2 is 6. So that's its res cost. It also does 2 net damage, and it has 2 end around subroutines. There's all these kind of patterns baked into the card. Also, its shape of 3 subroutines, 6 strength, 6 res, is Mirror's Brawn, with 1 face check and 2 end run subroutines. So there's a lot of there going on to help you remember what is on Boto. there's some other decision that I was like talking about with Friday about like why some cards are like consistent or like why certain decisions were made, and I don't remember I don't remember the example anymore. I'll bring it up later if I remember. But
Okay, cool. Yeah, I don't know if there's that much more to say about that, but yeah, I think that's a nice and easy one. I'll maybe read the next one. I think this is an interesting question, and like I have thoughts on it, but I'm also not in charge at all of design or development. So, from Diogene, why is the mark mechanic not coming back? Same to a lesser extent for charge and sabotage. Yes, cacophony combine both, but that's an exception. It seems like those mechanics came with Borealis and were abandoned. The mark mechanic introduced a way to gain a random advantage. More could have been done with that mechanic, in my opinion. Was there something egregious about the mark mechanic? Thanks. And that's from Diogene.
um, yeah, so I think sabotage is gonna come back. Like we are very comfortable writing sabotage on cards. And using it when it makes sense. It's just kind of been added to both the design and dev lexicon, so to speak, if you will. So it's like cacophony was a single instance of sabotage being in a set, and we try not to do that except for with like kind of evergreen kind of concepts. Vantage point probably being an exception to, doing one-off things that are callbacks. Um, and then charge, we're not going to touch charge ever again. It's just not particularly engaging, not particularly exciting, and has a lot of downsides to it. Um, and then Mark is somewhere in the middle of these two things. Mark doesn't have anything egregious, but I just also don't think that it has enough going for it to warrant utilizing it again in the future, given how much like it is a mechanic that asks you to randomize something that players like need to have come up with their own way of like randomizing. So having a mark die or saying like, hey, this one's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like that is kind of a pain in the ass. And if the mechanic was like super, super compelling and super awesome, then I think it'd be like an okay cost. But I don't think there's enough going on with Mark that makes it actually exciting, compelling. I think Sable is an example of something where it's a lot of power tied to a very random event. And Sable is like an okay, like game design use of Mark, in my opinion, but its power level being as strong as it is makes some of that RNG element just feel a lot worse. Because your game could like you could win or lose your game based off of like how you rolled the mark die. Um, Something like Carpe Diem, I like a lot because it's one off. You don't have to constantly roll it at the beginning of your turn. Sometimes it's a ride you do want to take, sometimes it's not. But like ultimately, I think that the mark mechanic overemphasizes runs on centrals, and probably the largest issue that I have with Mark was the concentration of it in Borealis, making it so that Crim became exclusively about running centrals. And it's not the kind of mechanic that warrants like, or it's not the kind of mechanic that benefits from having like one or two. Like it's just not worth that cost. So if we're not going to do it in like an abundance, then we probably shouldn't be doing it at all.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think a way to think about it is like to me, Mark had a couple of different ways it was tried to be used. So one way was basically a successful run trigger, but just like some percentage of the time it was going to be more difficult than just the weakest server to get a successful run on, which like I think is an interesting idea, but I think it had that like it adds an element of randomization. You have to now like when Sable was everywhere, it's like every single turn or every single game, someone had to explain how they're going to randomize the mark this turn, and then add an extra 10, 15 seconds to every round while I roll the die. Then have to think about, okay, this is my result. What am I going to do with this? And it just sort of adds up to lots of little mechanics that don't do that much in the way of payoff. And the other cards that try to be like, oh, maybe this can be active while you're running the mark, kind of just all missed. Like the only one I can think of that was even really tried was the, oh my goodness, I'm forgetting the name of the dog breaker. Um,
Tunnel vision.
Tunnel Vision.
Yeah,
Um,
tunnel vision.
yeah. Like it just sort of, I mean, that card is not a, like that card. I feel like if it didn't, you could come up with another restriction on that card and it still wouldn't be good. Like it's just kind of not a great numbers card. It has,
Yeah,
but
the
like,
numbers on it are pretty bad.
but it's hard to imagine like I think it's difficult for me to think like, oh yeah, what Netrunner needs is even more turn by turn randomness to make the game feel better. So I think it's not that Mark was bad; it's just that it wasn't worth the baggage. Whereas like Charge, I think was basically a bad mechanic. And yeah, I I completely agree with Safer. It's never going to be done. I actually think to her credit, Whiteblade was calling out Charge as being a bad mechanic while still in playtesting, and I steadfastly refused to acknowledge that. That's not entirely true, but we definitely had lots of discussions about it back then. So,
So there are
uh,
6 mark cards: Carpe Diem, Virtuoso, Sable, Tunnel Vision, Backstitching, Info Bounty. Of these, Carpe Diem, Sable, Info Bounty, I would say are the quote unquote more successful ones. Um, and I think Info Bounty is actually probably the single best and
yeah,
interesting use of Mark from like a game design perspective. So I think Info Bounty is like the highest on my list of like good uses of it. And then Backstitching gets like a special nod here, in my opinion, for being a card that's like you kind of hold it and save it for when the mark rolls the thing that you wanted it to roll.
yeah. I think that was kind of like I was going to shout out that as being the other kind of interest. Like I think that to me is the more interesting card than Sable, even though Sable was like significantly more powerful and much more meta relevant than backstitching. I think that idea of like I have this tool and it may like I have to kind of I don't have full control over when it's going to be in the optimal position. I think is kind of interesting. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I do think there's a cost of like, yeah, do we want to have people carry around Mark Die for events in 5 years if the only card that's relevant, if there's like one card that's relevant? Probably not. I remember playtesting a version of Liberation that had court mechanics, and there was a version of like, oh, so I just have to include this extra card in my box for this one piece of ice that has this mechanic that just has good numbers, and that being a big discussion point. So there's like some hidden costs on mechanics when they have to contain outside of the game components to like resolve properly. It adds a lot of extra baggage to keep them around.
Yeah. All right. So Wentagon asks, which type is the best for a given definition of best, which is unspecified? Um, is it ice versus assets versus upgrades versus agendas versus operations? Like, which one is the best of those? And of course, secondarily, runner programs versus hardware versus resources versus events.
So
I
obviously this
have
question,
a couple
yeah.
pitches for Corp. You go first.
Sorry, well, I missed what you said because I was starting to talk.
I have a couple of pitches for the Corp side one and very loose thoughts for the runner, but you should go first.
I think I have a pretty strong ordering for a corpse, though it's a little bit funky. I think
Okay.
so. I guess it's funny to me. I think ice to me is both simultaneously the best type and the worst type. And with I think more of my weighting on best. I think ice ends up being the thing that makes Netrunner work in a way that like basically every other card type it's responding to. That said, like almost all ice, like it's hard to actually make interesting ice cards because for the most part they are just a credit math taxing kind of thing rather than oh, I'm playing this card for its text, which feels like a very odd thing for me to say about a card being the best. But to me, I think ice is like the most defining and like central thing in Netrunner in many ways. And a lot of the metas that go out of whack are because ice has gone sideways in one way or another.
Hmm. Yeah, I do agree with that. I think that we can look at it from like a systems perspective and say like the Netrunner as like like Netrunner's game systems are very reliant on ice and agendas in particular, and ice is the more important and better, like more interesting card type in my opinion than agendas. Agendas are just there to be scored or stolen, and like yeah, they have effects on them, but like realistically, like their role in the system is to provide a win condition or like a game end condition, I guess I should say. And ice is the thing that's creating all like the texture over like the different courses of the game. Um, that being said, when we look at it from a perspective of which card types typically make for the most interesting like archetypes and have the most like varied effects, like what am I most excited to design as a designer kind of thing,
I feel like it's
I
got to
think
be
that it's
assets,
like
right?
I actually think it's operations, then assets, then upgrades, then
Interesting.
agendas slash ice again on the bottom. Like operations, I think there's just something incredibly satisfying about play card, do thing, and you can do so many different things with operations. Like the world is your oyster because it only has to happen a single time, and you just put a credit cost on it. Like Mioshu doesn't make sense as an asset or an upgrade. Like Mioshu's the kind of effect that you could just slam in an operation, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And like that
That's
a
fair.
Mioshu is a very, very different kind of effect than like a I don't know, an unleashed or a hedge fund or a petty cash. Like there's so much different texture that you can put in operations. Um I think playing operations is fun,
Yeah, it's
says the
interesting
Flood
because
BD enjoyer.
maybe I play so many corps that like try and minimize their. I guess I should say I've played way too much ob and like asset, like wide HB decks where it's like you want to play like the bear, like you play like your one powerful defining operation and that's it. But like I guess to that extent, like yeah, for corporations having this defining operation is a big deal, and a lot of the defining cards are operations. And I think probably in part because they actually have a lower interactivity space, so you just get a lot more certainty that you will be able to resolve them. And because they're one-time effects, they get to have bigger effects, right, than the other components
Yeah.
in the game.
And here's another like argument for operations. Like podcast names inspired by cards, clearly operations is the best.
Let's see, we've got measured response, we've got neon static, which is cerebral static, right? Shallow
Mhm.
net goes against you. Um,
That is
trying to
true.
think
That
what
is
other
true.
QTM an ID. I'll have to think. I'm gonna get called out for not remembering other podcasts now. Slumscast, a resource if I'm remembering correctly. So those are, yeah, those are. I don't know. I think it's. I mean, obviously we should be partial to ourselves, but I also remember being told by someone right before Netrunner players, you stop naming things after cards. Right before I was about to tell them we were starting a podcast named Measured Response. So.
That's so
um,
funny.
Yeah, I think so. I think for me, like the best, I think, like I do think ice is like the best for like is the most important foundation. But I think, boy, for me, I would probably put assets and upgrades, then agendas, then operations, and then like I would actually put ice last in terms of like overall power or something on that metric. I think assets and upgrades are really what I think it define a lot of the corp strategies. Um,
All right. So give me like a pitch for like what are the assets that, you know, that are that are like this is the best. This showcases that assets are in fact the best type. Because I do think
so
that assets and
yeah.
upgrades are very different.
Yeah, so I think like there are, I guess to me, I think of many corp decks as being defined by having assets that give like to me like actually something that's not mentioned here, right, is IDs, which is actually a whole extra type that
True.
is probably to me I think actually the best for corpse, the best type, because the purpose of IDs on the corpse side is to like because corporation as a whole is about making a puzzle. IDs are one of the best parts about making a puzzle for the runner to crack or fail to crack. I think to me, the most interesting thing about assets, or like why they're the best, is because they get to present problems, but because they are interactable, like that actually makes them uh, they get to have a pretty wide space that they can potentially inhabit. I think it's the card type that does the most different. Like assets can literally do everything in the game, just about. And so I think it makes them a very interesting space to build out of. And I think of many decks that are dependent on particular assets giving new abilities that like, or even win conditions on their own that I think are pretty interesting.
Hmm. Okay, that's a good point. Hmm. I buy it. Having This is not to contradict the statement. Having thought a lot about different assets, it does feel like their numbers are very constrained to making them like viable.
Hmm.
But this is like it's not like just like an operation where you can just be like, this is what it should cost. It's a lot of money if it needs to be, like a really powerful effect or whatever. Like it's hard to make like a asset that is super strong that is like, oh, well, this should be like 5 to res. It's like, okay, well,
Yeah,
also
yeah.
how much is it to trash, right? Like at some point, you probably remember this. There was a asset they were testing that was like, I think 6 to res and 3 to trash. And that asset was not okay.
Yeah, that asset was turbo busted. It was a lot of fun.
It was turbo busted. But like that's the kind of thing where it's like, okay, maybe we can't actually like the design space for assets is not as like wide as it
I
would
mean, I
seem
think
on the
that card would have still
surface.
been broken as a. I think that card, in fact, was inherently just suspect. But
Well, the point is that it's repeatable, right? The
yeah,
point is that it's ongoing, is that it's persistent. If you just make up a board state of repeatable ongoing effects, that's going to overwhelm your opponent.
I
Cough,
think that's
cough, companions. Um,
yeah. I guess the thing I think that's interesting about assets is in part that ability, though. Like, yes, the design, like as a designer, I see that there's constraint there, and like, yeah, making a 6 res 3 to trash, like, yeah, it turns out that like you can't make the effects on individual assets that big because it's just very difficult to get the balance of the different both the res effect and the cost trash cost like that impactful. But I think assets snowball in a very interesting way relative to how basically all the other types snowball. I think Netrunner's a game that is a lot about snowballing and building up advantages, and has a lot of the system has a lot of kind of uh, I'm not gonna say anti-snowballing, but like you need to do a lot of win more in Netrunner. I think relative to some other games, I think assets are a very interesting space that like do the most of that uh, snowballing and building. And like part of this is also like I love to Euro game, and assets are the Euro game part of the corp side, right?
mhm. I think that part of my so I had a little aha moment while you're talking about this, which is that I think that agendas and ice are the primary thing that make Netrunner different in the systems level. But when it comes down to like card effects and gameplay, assets are the most unique Netrunner card type that also provides like meaningful and like corp controllable card effects, right? Like ice, it's the runner's gonna like you may never flip your ice, right? It just depends
Yeah,
on where the runner's running. You don't always get to time it. Assets you're in complete control over, agendas you actually need to like score out, and sometimes you don't want to see, right? Assets are like they're like on I don't know, like an enchantment in Magic,
I actually feel
but
like that. I almost wonder if they're closer to dude. Like this is the thing of like in a dude basher, I feel like assets are much closer to little mob dude kind of things because
I mean
they are the thing you can
they
interact with. But
are. they're the thing can interact with if the opponent's economy is attack value and they're
Yeah, yeah,
attacking your things and they choose, but they don't know what they're attacking when they attack it. Like
yeah,
assets, I think like are like the more like quote unquote actionable part of like what makes Netrunner different, right?
yeah,
Um, yeah.
yeah. And I don't know. I think like
Also,
upgrade. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
my favorite assets are still going to be things like Gaslight. Like,
Mm.
like I like cards like Cohort and have things that have ongoing effects. Some of those are really interesting, but I think like Gaslight Reaper to me are like the cards where you know you have a whole bunch of face downs, they
So
stay face down, and
your
they
favorite assets are events, basically.
no comment.
Yeah. Whereas like yeah, my favorite assets
Not
are
all of
like
them, but like
my favorite assets are stuff like I think about like oh yeah like cybernetics court is one of my all time favorite assets and like wage workers and cohort like these things are like
I do love wage workers.
I'm gonna build
I
these
love
like
wage workers.
incremental value engines over you. And like do things that kind of break the rules in a way that's fair because you can interact, but like is also letting me break a rule of the game in a fundamental way. I think is kind of cool.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like I like wage workers is probably my favorite of all time. But also you can play triple operations and get a click back when you do it. So
I think for the runner side, it's actually to me like not. I don't know. I think programs from the design point are the best like design type because it actually has a constraint. Events are I think what's probably the most actually best type, and then hardware and resources I like am more and more coming to believe that these are actually the same card type, and so it's kind of like they're both kind of whatever. Um,
I would go as far as to say that program hardware and resources are all the same card type, and that icebreakers are their own unique card type. And that is where the distinctions outside of MU counting,
I was gonna say
those are the
MU
only
counting. I think
distinctions.
I mean, I think it's not been a thing that gets accentuated that much in Netrunner, but I think there's stuff like I think the space that read, write, share inhabits is an interesting peek into a world where MU is more relevant. Um,
I look, I agree. Obviously, MU is relevant. It's a constraint, but like when I'm thinking about like analyzing the system and like what do the different card types mean, like clearly there is no mechanical distinction between hardware and resource. So we just get to say, guess what? They're both installables, and the game tells you how those types are relevant, right? Other
I
card
mean,
effects will tell you how they're relevant.
technically, the
Um,
basic action card makes a distinction between hardware and resources, but I think in practice,
Jeff,
the game.
that is the most God, what is that dropout show called? Technically where you're like technically correct. That's
Oh,
the most
oh, shoot.
actually fucking
Yeah,
thing
that
you've done
is.
to me on this podcast so far. Actually pushes up glasses.
Uh,
But like my point is that if you took MU off of programs or you printed a whole bunch of zero MU programs would still just basically be installables that technically you could choose to destroy when you install a new one. That would be the only like other game rule.
mhm.
But like functionally, the cards around your system and like their card effects and the synergies they provide, that's what tells you the differences between these different types. So I have a really hard time saying like this type is better than this other type. Um, that being said, I still like the texture. I think consoles are some of my favorite cards on the
Yeah,
runner side. So
I think the interesting thing about runner cards to some extent is because the types are so like mechanically the same that actually they could be almost entirely thematically differentiated, which I actually think is like I realize I'm like this is two people that care a lot about the design of Netrunner and not as much about the theme and narrative of Netrunner. And I actually think like the hardware resource program distinction like has been carried out thematically quite well in a lot of cases and it's like some of the like
yeah,
very neat parts of the design space in that realm, but like from a game system design, I mean I think it probably is like events are the most interesting, then programs, and then much down further down the line is hardware and resources, with consoles maybe given their own special carve out as a really interesting card. I think there's a version of Netrunner that would be interesting where it's like runners always can start with like a console in their hand or something like that. But I don't know, it'd be kind of. I feel like there could be fun like making the console more central to the runner game in some ways, even though they're not how it's not at all how the game
Sure.
works right now. Um, yeah,
Yeah, I have nothing to add.
cool. This next question comes to us from Cold Lava. Now that we're 6 months since the release of Vantage Point, what is your view of Let Them Dream? For me personally, it's one of my favorite cards in the set. It lets Corpse play without being overly worried of singles causing high variance. It requires runners to really have a game plan to win, which is really good for the game, in my opinion. The power level feels like it landed in the right spot as well. Lots of decks using it to great effect, but it's not a must include, and there are good reasons to skip it.
I I think I just kind of agree with this. I think that it is a card that like over time may become problematic. Like it might create like issues within the format, but like right now it pretty much just does all the things that it set out to do. And I was a doubter, and sometimes things just work out.
yeah,
So
I
awesome.
Yeah, I was also very much in the Data camp, and I'm glad that it has both proved to be much more commonly used than I thought it would be, but also has generally like it generally has led to good Netrunner gameplay. And I actually am not super worried about it being like a permanent like there's still a real possibility where it is just becomes GFI where like you basically have to have a good reason not to include it. But I think the like score text is just on the like it is possible to print agendas that can displace it in terms of what they do. And
Yeah.
I think it's more a lot of factions that are playing Let Them Dream right now are either doing it because they have a very synergistic agenda suite or because their in faction agendas are pretty crap, cough cough HB. Um, so like I think there's lots of I'm not worried about it that much in terms of the long term. It definitely has some places where it feels bad, but like I think to me the like it doesn't it's nice protection against singles, and to me highlights, I was talking about this on a car ride with people that like I really wish we had more real deep digging effects. Like there was a day when people would like click hit medium on the table and like run R&D over and over and over again, and like Conduit doesn't let you do that really. I mean, in theory it does, but in practice I don't think it does. And so I would love to see like, okay, now that Let Them Dream is in the pool, can we like give runners more synergistic requirements on multi-access and let the multi-access central power go up a little bit? But I don't know.
Yeah. I think the one thing that I've wanted is some sort of like incidental runner shuffle effect. Like
Hmm.
effect that the runners can use to shuffle R and R&D. Um
Yeah.
that's it. That's like the only thing where it's like, and I don't want it to be on like an insanely good card. I just want it to be like oh, you're a runner that like really needs them to not bottom their agenda and have it stay there for the entirety of the game. Here's like one card you could have chosen to include in your deck for other reasons, but like it's being slotted in over another card because it has the shuffle, you know?
I'll have to remember. I immediately I'm like, oh, here's some card pitches we could do for that. But yeah, no, I do think
Uh,
it.
there might be a card in the future, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Like it's having a shuffle effect. I think another thing I would love to have is a little bit of a better archives interaction, but like we actually have two. Well, we have one good card and one okay card. Well, one actually fairly bad
Yeah,
card for that. So like
yeah.
seeing a little bit more would be interesting there, I think. But also
I
potentially
double
the
I double checked. There's one card that fits this exact thing where I'm like, oh yeah, it has like a like not because like this card effect was this way independent of Let Them Dream stuff, but I was
Yeah,
looking
yeah.
at it. I'm
It
like,
it
oh
had a
yeah,
shuffle effect for other reasons, and it might be something to consider putting in your deck in part because of Let Them Dreams
right,
shuffle
right.
stacking effect.
Are you
Cool.
thinking? Are we thinking of the same? Do you know what card I'm talking about?
I have a guess, but I haven't looked at the card file, and I can't imagine a more painful thing to listen to on a podcast than two people insinuating a card that's not going to be in their hands for a while. So
Sure,
I think that's a
sure,
good
sure, sure.
good point to good time to move on to a question from SSJS Speed or SSJ Speed Racer. On a conceptual level, I really love Rebirth and DJ Fenris as cards that break some of the fundamental rules of Netrunner by letting you mess with your ID mid-game. Setting aside anything else, I think they're cool effects, and selfishly, I'm a little bummed I only got to back in the game about a month before Fenris rotated. Do you think there's space in the future of the Netrunner to make a new take on importing another ID ability mid-game, or do you think these are fundamental balance or design philosophy issues that would put you off wanting to reintroduce this mechanic to standard?
I'm kind of a mixed bag on this personally because I do think the effects are just cool. I completely agree with that. I also think they're just like a lot of fun. Um, I also think that they're incredibly uh linear and like easy to find, not easy to find. Once like the best use cases for them get discovered, there's no real reason to like to go down a different path than like whatever the optimal one is. So like when we talk about DJ Fenris sounds really cool, but realistically, like in my head, DJ Fenris might have well just read as choose two cards in your heap, showed
the
them
corp, like,
both.
yeah, yeah.
The corp gets to choose
The
one.
text that they might
Like,
have well as had the text of Steve just on them, right?
right,
Um,
exactly. And like, no joke, I half read this and went, DJ Fenris, that's what the card does. Um, because the restrictions that were put on the card and what the card pool was, like, that is just what happened. And so I think that
yeah,
takes some of the coolness out of it, is like, it should be a choice.
yeah.
Um,
The only other DJ deck I can ever remember was like doing Haley and Geist, and you would do them one and the other. Like you could do those both ways because they both had the Gmod text and stuff. But
mhm.
and like those were it's like, oh, those two IDs have synergistic, like they solve each other's problems, so like it made sense to put them together as a DJ. But like, yeah, I think it had there's some amount of issue. Like I think they're very cool cards, but I think they've I don't think their presence in the meta was ever actually that good. Which is a weird,
I mean,
like I
Rebirth
don't think
definitely wasn't. Rebirth certainly was not a healthy
yeah.
presence, I don't think. Fenris, I think, was a lot closer because it just read as, here's a resource that's like kind of busted, but like actually okay for the power level at the time.
Yeah, and I think, it's I don't know, I like it's one of those things where it's like I suspect that that kind of card effect will come back in the pool at some point because it's just fun. It is fun to say, "Oh, let me take two things that can never be together and put them together." Like
Yep.
basically, I feel like a rule of games is that as soon as you make a restriction, you immediately are thinking, "Okay, when do I get to break this restriction?" So I would be shocked if we never see those effects again, but I think there's probably going to be some look at, can we make these effects more is there other ways to make them more interesting and more uh like encourage jankier stuff, encourage more choices being taken rather than, all right, I'm playing Anarch or Shaper, so I get Steve. I'm playing Criminal, so I never think about it. And then, oh, if I'm rebirthing, I take an ID that has card text at the beginning of the game that's really good, and I rebirth into an ID that has text that's really good at the end of the game. I
Right.
think like Rebirth had that problem very severely, and like is an effect I think basically shouldn't exist because of that. And the problem with DJ is like it has almost the inverse problem where like you have to have a card that just gives you a lot of value as soon as you find it, whether that's on the first turn or on like the 12th turn, which is just like a weird a weird set of constraints for these. I would kind of be interested to see. I don't know. I like some kind of like Atom style directives that let you pull in other IDs in
Yeah.
some way, shape, or form, so they were consistent and you could like plan around them. But
The other thing that I want to see on breaking inherent rules of the game is like, let me install more than one console. You know, like get like I think it'd just be sick if there was like some identity that was like you can install two consoles. Like I think that that's like kind of the same energy, you know?
yeah, I mean, generally two consoles. I feel like it's one of the. I feel like it's been a running joke for since like since when I started playing in like 2014.
I didn't
Yeah,
realize that that was a joke,
yeah,
but
yeah.
that's funny. Yeah. Huh.
Cool.
But yeah, like I don't know. Let's install multiple consoles. That sounds sick.
Let me play Ob and Asa at the same time. Like let's go. Um,
Right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
Give the people
Ob
what they want.
Ob and every other corp. Let's go. Um, yeah, no, uh, but yeah, no, I mean, like, yeah, I think this effect will come back in. I think it's an effect that, like, it's effect that you really do want to be rotating in and out of the game. So I'm looking forward to seeing when it comes back, but I don't. Uh, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay.
cool.
Let's
Uh,
see.
do you want
Next
to read the
question
next
comes
one?
from RJ Delgato. In the core rules of Netrunner, corpse have an alternative win condition, dealing more damage than the runner has cards, and the card pool does a pretty great job of supporting this strategy across multiple factions. However, runners also have an alternative win condition, aka milling out all of the cards from the corpse deck, and this strategy seems to be quite underserved aside from ESA and sabotage mechanic. I'd love to hear your thoughts on runner side milling strategies, why we don't see a lot of representation of the card pool, and whether you think strong mill archetypes on the runner side would be a good thing to exist. Thank you. Hope you both are doing well.
Yeah.
Um,
So
Jeff, I have
I
a feeling we're going to go to the same place.
okay.
Do you want to count down and just say like 3, 2, 1, and then say the one thing that we're thinking of? Also, I
Uh,
need to
I don't know how to
remember
do it as a.
the
I'll need to think about how to do it as a short phrase, but
No, it's very okay. There is one 3-letter acronym that you should be saying right now.
oh no, I have no idea what you're thinking of.
DLR.
Oh, geez. I don't know how. I literally drafted DLR last week. I forgot. I never installed it. In my defense, I but actually no. I think I did install it basically to make the corp trash it out of fear. Uh, but but yeah, you're right. DLR is totally what I should be thinking of. Um,
You should be thinking of DLR.
I was going to say something entirely different, which is that it is basically a redundant mechanic. If the corp has run out of cards in their deck, they have already like they've already lost. And if you're milling, like ultimately milling in Netrunner is the same thing as R&D multi-access. Um, and so there's like that reason why mill is not that supported is because if you make really strong mill cards, you're actually just printing a really strong R&D multi-access card, and it's probably less interactive. And then there have been strong mill archetypes in the past. There was Noise was the original mill archetype with Personal Workshop, and this was before there was any kind of recursion effect for corpse. Like the corpse were limited, I believe, to just archive memories as their like really only archives interaction for quite a long time. And I guess Project Vitruvius, which is heavily limited to one faction. Um, Jackson Howard got printed, and then DLR got printed, which was a mill based strategy and was incredibly toxic. As much as I think if you go back, actually, I recorded an episode that was meant to be one of the record reconstructors. We were looking at DLR Max and had a DLR Max advocate on who was talking about all the intricacies and cool elements of the matchup. And I never ended up releasing that video in part because I was trying to play both sides at the same time, which was much more challenging than I expected it to be. And also because it did end up that in one of the two games we recorded, it was just hit the DLR button until the corp conceded, which did
I mean,
kind of
that
defeat
is
the
my
purpose.
recollection. That is my general recollection of those games and how they went back then. So DLR, data leak reversal, for those that were not around for it, is a card that said basically you can only use it if you're tagged. It was also a resource, and it just had click the Corp Mills. I think it's just the top card, right? It's not two.
Yep.
It's just
It
one.
was just the one.
Yeah. Mills the top card of R&D into archives, and strategies came about that were really consistent about just getting a tag, account siphoning them into the ground, and just DLRing them so they turned off all of the corpse options. And I don't think it was particularly fun. And I think that's the primary reason why you won't see that many like runner-sided mill strategies like appear consistently. Like I think that it has to be done really, really well. And I think this is a really good example of it being done incredibly well. Their self is also like they have a wick, so they have a time limit as well. So whoever's playing Issa is basically on the same like time limit that the corp is on, and I think that that's like a really healthy, uh, like a much healthier implementation of it. I think that ultimately it's not that fun for either player because it kind of like skirts all of the natural tension that should exist in Netrunner systems, where like kill is just like really fun. It doesn't it ends the game abruptly and immediately, but usually there's a whole bunch of like tension and like tug of rope going on back and forth between players jockeying for things like before the murder actually happens. Whereas on the mill, it's just like we're gonna sit here both and just wait for the inevitable, but we have to sit here and like maybe I draw the one agenda that allows me and like enough fast advanced pieces out to like get it out or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's like if ESSA I think largely works because outside of the ID, every sabotage effect is requiring interaction, um, and that's what makes it work. So like I think if other mill strategies could come around, they're just going to look a lot like ESSA, where they have to be about making runs and they have to be about making points of interaction, and having a short wick I think is another good element to it because you're inherently cutting down the corpse wick as well. But I think yeah, to me it's also like a lot of mill is just R&D multi-access in this game in a way where mill does behave differently than it does in a game like Magic the Gathering, where it sort of is it's a true alternate win condition there where it does literally nothing until the game ends. Whereas in Netrunner, like mill, you can just get unlucky and lose on like 5 cards being milled, and that's just not how other games with mill as a strategy work.
Yeah. Corporations rule asked a simple question, or a short question, I should say. How would the world be different if Melies didn't provide the corp with a credit on turns it wasn't flipped?
I think
And I think
music. Yeah, I
Mhm.
think this is. It is just. It is. I think the funny thing is, I think it would still be banned. Well, okay, maybe it wouldn't be banned. The idea would just be a lot more boring, because what that incentivizes actually is the runner just never running centrals. Because now, if the runner can play the entire game never running a central, then the corp play the entire game without an ID, and that's just like the
Yep.
worst possible outcome. I think this actually like as much as I think Melies U was overtuned, like I'm pretty sure there was a version without it having credit gain, and like the credit gain is essential for making it a Netrunner card, I think.
Yeah, I don't know what versions were and were not tested because I wasn't super tuned in at that point, but I remember talking about it with the rest of the team, about like how to simplify the cards in some ways and like the credit portion kind of coming up. And I was very firmly like, this thing needs to have the credit gain on it because you need to have an incentive for the runner to run. And I think what we found is that people over time where it's like, it's not worth it. I'm just going to let you have the credit. And while the card might be like more like win rate balanced, like the win rate number for Melies U might be more balanced if it didn't have that effect, or maybe it would just be like bad win rate. The play experience would be terrible because like now not only is the runner not basically ever running centrals, the corp is also going at like an incredibly slow speed because like we all know that the game is in the remote and is focused on the remote. So they're going to sit there and build up the remote for as long as it takes, but they're not going to have like the inherent credit gain to like push the game forward. Instead, they're just going to be actually sitting there being like, I'm going to click for 3 credits. So that's the reason why it may not have been like, again, it may have made the card too good, but the alternative was like the identity being like genuinely unfun on both sides of the table.
Yeah, I
And like
think
a whole bunch of text box for like literally no gameplay.
yeah, it would be the case of like, oh yeah, if it didn't have that credit on the front, the optimal gameplay would be that we had printed the back, we had printed three backsides with tons of text that would be flipped never in optimal play, which is a bad outcome, right? This is actually one of those cases where I'm like, this is the difference between like balance, like there's a, I mean, I'm sure I don't know if we've had the like balance isn't real rant that you've that I'm sure you have locked and ready to go at any point. But like this is a like Melius is much more of a game design ban or a game design challenge, and it's just a tricky one. And
Yeah.
it kind of missed, and it's a little bit unfortunate. I like to me
Yeah.
the thing I would actually want to do is give the runner more of a benefit for dodging the gas, but that's more text,
Yeah.
right? It's a lot more text, and so it's just tricky. Um,
It's a lot more text, and also where do you put that text? This was something that like in an ideal world, like if it was like a digital client, digital implementation kind of thing, and we could patch the game and we had a whole bunch of fancy UI that made our lives so much easier, then we could do like if the runner, like when Melius U flips, if the runner didn't get it, or if the runner got it right, if the corp got it wrong, excuse me,
yeah, the runner
then
gets a payout.
the runner gets like 2 credits or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So now it's like an active downside, more like daily quest like. But like if you go and read the card or like look at the pieces of cardboard, where do you put that text? Like
Yeah.
it's literally like there's no place to put it and have it make any kind of sense and make it like followable. And this is already a card where like when it came out, a bunch of people were like, you're going to read the text on this card. Don't read the text on the card. Let me explain to you what it does.
Yeah. No, for sure. Uh, let's go on because we have another Melius U question. I actually think there might be less discussion on this one, or at least less discussion on the main part of the question. There might be discussion on the second part, but uh, this comes from OK then, and it said, would unbanning Sable make it possible to unban Melius U? To me, it seemed to me that the major reason why Melius felt so oppressive was because it made value runs on centrals, aka the basic runner archetype of Trim, a losing proposition. The Mark minigame plausibly messes with Melius ID text in an interesting way. Was that matchup tested much during Vantage Point's development? Also, in my opinion, Melius has far more sauce than RH, and Sable has far more sauce than any other Red Crim IDs. Playing with saucy IDs is fun. You've been on record that Melius U is not coming back standard for the foreseeable future, but as a standard balance key, any opportunities for runner previously banned for power reasons to return, especially in light of R Plus's lukewarm performance. Hosh, for instance, might not even be better right now than Lu given the current asset meta.
All right,
Um,
so where to start here? So
let's
I
start
guess
by
we start
talking
at the
about
top.
the Sable Melius U interaction and
Yes.
considerations.
I think that I don't think that Sable being the card pool makes Melius U like worse. I think that Melies U being in the card pool would be a better would make for an environment that might be okay for Sable to come back because Melies U, I'm sure, dunked on Sable like no other.
Yeah.
Um, Sable became probably a blank text box, and I'd probably rather be playing as or Baz or Moosely Hot, anything that doesn't ask me to actively make a run on centrals and potentially give them a trigger seems like a better place to be, especially when it is a random one and either, oh, the archives is open and is definitely the Milius U thing that they triggered, and I rolled it as Mark. Okay, do you then make the value proposition of is giving them the pretty guaranteed recursion trigger here worth my info bounty and click back kind of thing. Um,
Yeah, or do I
it
have to like
just,
make the suboptimal turn plan? Like, okay, I wasn't going to run R&D, but I really want to run my mark, so I'll run R&D to then let me run archives. Like, it's just not.
yep,
I think it. So like, yeah, I don't think I'm banning Sable. Like, I actually think it would feel terrible, um, to have to like. I just don't think that matchup ends up being interesting. Like randomly getting your mark to work or not work, I think would feel bad for both
yep,
sides of the table. And I also think Sable was not banned. Like I don't think that like that Sable would have one bad matchup doesn't to me say good that means Sable should come back because you look at every other matchup and you're like oh no Sable would just be so ridiculous here. Um,
yeah. I totally agree with that because like imagine we don't ban Milius U, we unban Sable instead because we're like, oh, it's totally fine. There's a predator in Milius U. Okay. Well, yeah, most of the time people probably aren't playing Sable then because Milius U is probably seeing a lot of play. But then also if Sable is seeing any amount of play in consideration, even in spite of its bad performance in Milius U, it's probably dunking on every single other corp. Like truly, truly dunking on them, especially with deep dive in the pool.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. I don't
I
remember
mean,
if Sable.
honestly,
Yeah.
that's probably I'm really thinking it's like, oh, I don't even know if Sable would have a terrible time in Milius U if it's just
Well,
deep dive Sable with
I
like
don't think Deep
3x
Dive would. I don't think
vibrato.
Deep Dive and Sable will ever be in the pool together at the same time going forward.
No, I don't think I wouldn't suspect that they would. But like
Yeah.
I'm like, oh yeah, I guess like you Estabrado the server that like to do the Milius U trigger and then you run your mark because yeah, but then you also hit a bite and then you lose your deep dive. So like who cares?
Yeah.
Um
Yeah. I guess it's like I don't think it's difficult for me to say, oh, this one card changes the Melius U was a problem not because of Crims couldn't make enough value against it, right? It was like it
yep.
had a host of other issues. I do think Sable was in for playtesting for much of Vantage Point, but I'm gonna be honest, I don't remember. I'm not a big Crim player, so I don't know how much it was or wasn't tested
Yeah,
then.
Sables. Oh, do I remember?
Yeah, I don't remember either.
Oh,
Uh,
I don't remember. I think that Sable was around for the
yeah, I think
majority of
the
this.
Sable
So
ban, even though it came out with release, was not like a don't test with it. I think it was much more of a in light of the things that are happening in standard. It was I like Sable coming back basically says outside of the specific Melius U matchup, you shouldn't be playing another Crim identity. So to some extent, banning Sable is doing that. Sable also says if you're not playing Melius U, you probably shouldn't be playing a Corp. So it's just like got this weird snowball of like it doesn't make the adding Sable back in the pool ends up being subtractive to the card to the actual card pool of Netrunner, I think. And I think Melius U is kind of similar. Um, though maybe has I would say Melius U is more its other problems in that it just made for pretty unfun games. Uh, so
yeah.
um,
All right, should we go to the next one? Oh gosh.
no,
Oh no.
I wanted to talk quickly about sauciness
Okay,
and other stuff.
sure.
I
Do
mean,
the
yes,
sauce.
Melius U has more sauce than Restoring Humanity. It had a lot more text than Restoring Humanity, and it's fun to play busted stuff. But I don't think that in and of itself is not enough, I guess. And like, that's the biggest hypocrite thing to as an op apologist to say. Um, but I also think the claim that Hosh might not be better than Lou right now is not one
Yeah.
I would take
Look, I
particularly
thought we were just gonna
seriously.
let. I
But
just okay. I have. We have to go down this road now. Now that you brought it up. Now that you brought attention to it. Um, I think that Hosh is, at least in the time that I've come back from the game, so not Wizard. Wizard's not going to count as this. I think that Hosh is the single best asset, like ID against assets that I've seen in like NSG era. Like I think that it heavily beats out Lou,
yeah.
um, because Hosh is more generic and can build their deck to be just more generically robust and is more likely to find cards faster. So one of the reasons why I think Hoshiko is so good is because you you are credit and card positive like turn one against any other identity. Unlike Lou, who actually requires to find a trashable for it, all Hosh does is either basically Hosh gets to adapt to whatever the corp did, independent of whatever their game plan is. Sometimes when playing assets against Lou, you do sit there and you go, you know what? I don't want to give Lou a trashable. I have a play pattern that basically allows me to like, go hedge, like draw, hedge, ice HQ. So I'm not giving the Lou any trashable that actually impacts me. They can trash something at the top off of R&D if they really want. Whereas Hoshiko just goes, okay, I see that you did that. I'll go run a R&D. I'll get that information. And it didn't need to find a trashable or not. It doesn't need to literally sink money into whatever the corp's game plan is and turn on Oppo or all of these other things. It just gets to say, okay, cool. Now I got two additional dollars right now, or one additional dollar really. I got a card draw, and maybe that card draw is like a daily cast. So now I get to install it one turn sooner. And then I get an off turn to like, so I don't actually like go down into credits. Like Hoshiko is just so unbelievably stupid good. And I think it's really hard to appreciate just how like seeing like one card deeper, one click earlier is on like the power level of a deck as a whole. And then that allows you to build even greedier decks that you couldn't build anywhere else. Hoshiko is busted. The
Yeah.
end.
And like R plus coming back, I think has much more to do with NBN having a real issue at the moment, rather than like, oh man, it's the precedent for a bunch of unbans. Um, and like
Right.
NBN is a card.
If we banned all of the companions, and so if we banned all companions, so basically Anarch had almost no economy in faction, we could unban Hoshiko, and Hoshiko might not do anything, and you might be like, wow, well, Hoshiko unbanned is totally fine. Because there's like no because the card pool is like a husk of
Yeah.
like a functional thing.
Yeah.
I don't think
Cool.
NBN's in that bad of a spot, but like
Yeah.
it's
Okay.
not good.
Do we want to do this last question from me here, and then we have a couple of other good questions, but seeing as we're over an hour, we probably should wrap it up, and we'll move these questions forward. Uh,
Yeah, I think that we should do the next two and
okay,
then
sure,
save the rest for later.
sounds good. So this is a short question, a second one from me here today. Simple yes or no question. If you don't want to spend too much time on my other one, do you regret unbanning Excavator?
Ask me again after Worlds. That's my honest to God answer. We will
Yeah.
see. At the moment, like I get kind of nervous about it. I think is my current placement. But then I also played the Obelisk at like Cabin, and I was like, I think I'd rather be playing other things. And maybe it's just because like I'm not a good enough op player, you know? Like that could 100% be like part of the answer here, but I did feel like my games with like the 1 foot obelisk were very swingy. Either I won super hard or I lost super hard, and I got like stuck with a bunch of agendas in hand a lot because it's playing like 11 freaking agendas and you're ob, so like your agenda density is at the freaking roof. Um, I don't know.
Yeah, I
I don't
guess
know if it's strong enough to call it regret yet, but
yeah, I don't know. Like I haven't actually gotten to play much Sweetigore Ob. I think it's a playstyle that like I look at all of the stuff it's doing right now. I'm like that feels a little bit silly to me when you could be doing more direct stuff to try and win. Um, I could see a world where it's pretty annoying. That said, like as much as I always rail against the numbers, I'm not sure that Ob is a huge numbers outlier right now. Like Corps as a whole are just doing well because they've got a very diverse set of strategies, which is just very difficult for runners to handle. We've got very rushy Corps out of Nuvim. We've got asset heavy, like a tempo-y asset deck out of Ob, and then we've got like uh, a much more asset damage deck out of Alco with like just enough with other corps being able to spice in like other alternative plans. So runners are just stretched a lot of ways. Um, I think probably the thing that probably crystallized most of me is like I think that probably like if every game of Netrunner in at Worlds or whatever was a open deck list thing, I think Ob would feel. I think that would be very cool. I think one of the challenges with Ob is because it is such a toolbox deck, and if you don't know the specific, like it is a disproportionate skill check on the runner's knowledge of what your capabilities are relative to like I think it's like a thing of corpse are like it's not a fundamentally broken deck, but it kind of manifests in ways that are very difficult and can be frustrating to play against if you don't play a lot of Netrunner for sure.
so I think that I do think Ob's numbers are probably going to get to like very outlier by the end of the season. Like I think that that's just going to be true. I think that's almost guaranteed. Like I don't think Ob is going anywhere. I think it is one of the clear and away best corp lists. I do think that it is um a like a big like thing that you need to figure out how to be as any runner to compete. Um I'm not convinced that it's doing things that are fair, but also like I'm not so concerned with what it's like with what's happening and what's going on right now where I'm like this is completely untenable for until like worlds or whatever. Like I'm not currently seeing a reason why like the continental season like basically like I'm not seeing a reason why it should be like rebanned or whatever. Like I don't think that I don't think that I think that having continental season and having the uncertainty of like having to relearn a meta and being present or not present, I think that's like that I think it's way better to have people be certain and confident and have the continuation of the continental season going into worlds than like fuck. I don't know. I'm not saying it coherently, but I hope
Yeah, I mean,
people
I guess
Jeff,
like to like
say what I'm trying to say.
I think what you're trying to say is like Ob is probably a little bit unhealthy, but removing Ob is likely to have a larger disruption than like Ob is making the game. Like there's a balance between how much worse do you make the game by having a deck that does something that's unfair around versus disrupting everything by taking out a pillar of the meta. And it's like a balance. You're trying to balance those two things.
Yes, thank you.
So to read between the lines, like Svidicor Ob, like if it shows up and starts doing things at Continentals that like I think it's fundamentally to me like Obs are they're able to consistently do things in a way that probably is a little bit unfair, but they don't. I think that like there have been versions of Ob or combo decks that like you need to play specific tech and you need to find it by turn 4, 5, 6, whatever that are unfair and like are a problem for the game. And I think this current iteration of Ob is probably more just like the numbers are too good everywhere, but like if you are playing a well constructed runner deck, you can get there. And you don't need to be like teched out the gills kind of thing. So it's probably not like, yeah, it's probably something that I'm sure SBT members have regrets for, but yeah, I think it's more likely that post Worlds, it, well, Svidagor goes back on the ban list and Ob takes a nap. But uh, yeah,
I will never die.
that's what everyone was telling me before Svidagor got unbanned, and I just still don't really believe it. Um, but yeah, I would say like right now, Ob and Nuvim have essentially the same win rate. Now, admittedly, Ob is being played twice as much as Nuvim, but Corpse as a whole right now are doing really, really well. But I think part of that is we're very early in it. Like we are somewhat early in the meta, and so Corpse tend to have a larger advantage early in the meta.
Yeah. All right. Last question. Let's do it.
Yeah, this
This
comes
is
from
from
Icarus. It
Icarus.
says ban list conversations
Yeah.
often get focused on competitive balance. What if instead their main aim was stimulating a more dynamic meta? Because set releases are relatively infrequent, despite the competitive season, SBT's approach can be to ban 2 or 3 of the more popular and foundational pieces from each faction for a set amount of time, say 3 months. Then after that time, unban them and ban another handful of cards. Competitive players would have to remain on their toes, factions and archetypes would have to keep being reimagined, and we could move from the potential should we ban X conversations by doing it, and then undoing it, and doing it again on purpose.
Um, okay, so I just want to start by shouting out that the very end here, where we could move on from the perennial should we ban X conversations, sounds very appealing to me. I know that's not the focus point necessarily of here, but like, just want to appreciate like that some of the conversations that I think we have around should we ban X like get a little bit circular and like it it is it's a very similar conversations that I feel like we have about bans and ban lists and what cards should or should not be on the ban list each time. And I feel like sometimes the conversations lack nuance, and sometimes the conversations are just freaking hard because it's a hard design space to work out. But I think that the key thing here, Icarus, you will also point out, which is because set releases are relatively infrequent, that's like the other really key thing to me here, where if ban lists need to get to a point where we are specifically aiming just to like shake up the meta and make things dynamic, then we're probably in a bad spot, and it probably relates to things outside of SBT, aka FCT's control. I mean, it's still within my control, and it's something that I'm working towards trying to make sure that we get a little bit more consistent on. But like, I don't think that games need to be updated all of the time to be fun and even to have dynamic metas. You can look at Super Smash Brothers Melee and StarCraft and a whole bunch of other games that have been around for literal decades at this point, and have still updating metas. Games can be around for a while, but like the games also like the meta itself does need to be fun. Like no one would play Melee if it was literally like a bad meta and then also didn't get updated. Um, so yeah, like I think that in some ways, like just saying like, hey, there's no ban list, deal with it for like a year, even if there's no new cards, like the meta would probably grow in ways that are unexpected and might be like more dynamic. But it just
Yeah,
depends on like what the card pool is like
I
and
do
what the
think there is
problems
a bit
are.
of an element of the like because campaigning for cards to get banned has meant that like Netrunner has a pretty great like relative to other games, like our ban list change rate to our card release rate is like pretty much the opposite, I feel like, of basically every other game. And there's definitely a world where like, oh, if we let metas cook longer, people would adapt might find more tools than adapt. But also there's the reality of like right now the card pool is really small, so the space to adapt is smaller, and like there might just not be the tools needed to make certain adaptations. But yeah, I mean, like I don't know. I feel weird saying this as like a podcast that because we're so weekly like spend so much time talking about cards being banned and unbanned, but I do also find the ban unbanned discussions kind of not the most interesting, and like there's a lot that I think the like this card's really powerful. Why does what does this deck look like without it? Or like things like that. Like those are interesting questions to me. So like, is this card should this card be banned? Like there's so many things to think about when banning. I guess I will say I played through an era where SBT knew there was gonna be no card releases for like 18 months and just did ban lists to shake up the meta. And boy, it's just not the right tool for making the meta interesting. Like no, the team doing that did a really good job with the tools they had, but just like banning and unbanning cards ends up just not feeling very fun, at least as it was implemented then. I think like uh I think before I would advocate for like a banning unbanning thing, I would advocate for like, oh, all events are going to be in a non-standard format or something like that instead. Um, like I would just do
Yeah.
bigger. I would just do whole format card pool changes rather than like small selective bans, and leave bans for the cases of this deck is doing something that's antithetical to make it to having fun games of Netrunner. To me, that's really what ban
Yep.
lists should be for. Um, and like at a certain point, like yeah, if a deck is the only good deck to play and it's everywhere, like that does at a certain point become antithetical to fun. But like to me, a deck being strong does not mean it should be banned on the ban list. It really should be because it's doing things that make the game as a whole less fun. Or like, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. I should also specify that like when I say like, oh, we could go a year with like no bans and maybe the meta would be more dynamic and interesting. Like part of the reason, like the only way in which that would work would be if the perception of everyone is like this is what has to happen. So for example, Melee and like Melee StarCraft, these are all games that are old enough that no one's updating them. Like no one's doing balance patches for them. No one has the expectation, like the communities playing them do not expect the companies to go back and make balance patches for them or whatever, right? There's also some cases of like Warcraft 3, like getting a random ass balance patch like a literal decade later, and like the community being like, okay, this is weird and cool, but like also kind of sucks, but also cool. Um, yeah, like it like we do not operate in that world. That world is not going to be ever be a reality. But I'm just like saying like we could go a year and have like a dynamic meta, but it would have to be because people were expecting there to be like no updates, right? The other thing I wanted to mention here is that like earlier I looked up FUT, just like had an RDB up because we were talking about like assets versus other different types and all this other things. And like, it just so happens that the top review for FUT, the very first line on it is, "I would be very surprised and honestly a bit annoyed if this card wasn't on the next ban list." It's literally the very first thing that's said on this FUT review. So that's the kind of like conversational piece that I'm talking about, where it's like this happens all the time, where someone doesn't like a card or something comes out seemingly kind of strong, and people are like, "So when is this card going to get banned?" It's like probably never.
Yeah.
It did seem really good when it came out, and yeah, I was like nervous about FUT, like, oh no, did we fuck up? And then it turns out like, okay, FUT is just strong and an interesting card, and now it's like a centralized pillar of things, and maybe sure, maybe one day it gets banned, but like it's just a strong corp card doing strong things, and I think that that's okay.
Yeah. Cool. All right. I think that should probably do it for tonight. Our quail, please throw that question into a questions thread for next week so I don't forget about it. We also had some other questions from Charlie V and Galahar, who we will get to next week. We just didn't have time for everything this week. I think we probably will just do another questions episode next week instead of a replay review, but we will probably go back to doing a replay review the week after that. And I think the other announcement, though we have no details yet, we are going to do a live crossover show with the ShadowNet the Thursday night before Worlds in Montreal. When there's more details, we will announce them here, but be on the lookout for that. Let's see. I think that's anything else you want to shout out, Safer, before we call it a wrap?
If you're interested in dude bashing card games, I'm working on a game called Fractals, and we're going to be doing a playtesting event thing, league match running. You could help make another card game. If you're interested, please message me. It'd be helpful. Thank you.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you, everyone. And we will see you all next week. Bye-bye. Bye, Safer.